Thank you, fellas, for that introduction. Much appreciated. It is a great honour for me to be addressing you today. Really it is. I see you students as the future leaders of our state and our nation. And if I can be of any assistance to, in the future, in your future successes from this morning's talk, well then I'll be doubly honoured. This graph that I commence with today tells a story of how Queensland has been performing economically over the past 25 years. The blue line is Queensland's record compared with the gold line representing Australia's, and the green line that is for the OECD countries of the world. The OECD countries, you might know, provides 2/3 of the world's economy. So this little chart tells a wonderful story of Queensland, which now has the best regional economy in the world. It is the best region to live in, as you know. As a matter of fact, as you know, as Queensland has the best under many headings. We are really the lucky country, but it wasn't always like that. And it's up to you as our future leaders to keep it that way and steepen, if you can, that upwards pointing economic trend line. In my 90 years on this earth, I've told you my age now, sorry about that. In my 90 years on this earth, I've lived through the bad parts, and I'll tell you some of those as we go along. I was also closely involved in our getting out of that mess, and I'll cover what happened and how we had to break new ground and the rules sometimes. My objective is to illustrate to you via my own experiences that you too can achieve what seems to be the impossible. You must accept that you jump at each hurdle as it presents. Don't give up. There is a way ahead. During my time, I served 10 premiers and 16 treasurers with political philosophies ranging from Genghis Khan to Karl Marx. In those days, senior public servants had no political affiliations and served the government of the day, no matter what its political platforms were. I noticed also that as we started to achieve success, when I pushed, things moved. This doesn't always happen to people with good ideas, but it was essential for us, with our huge task ahead, that we were accepted, supported and helped by the governments of the day. In other words, we couldn't, and you can't, do everything you dream of without the help from a loyal team. What were these bad times I've been talking about? What was the life like back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, just 50 to 90 years ago? I'll tell you a little personal experiences. Our home in Yamundi was 4-roomed, not 4-bedroom, just 4 rooms, plus a front veranda where the kids slept, 4 of us. There was no electricity. We had kerosene lights and lanterns, wood stoves, no refrigeration, no sewage, tank water caught from the roof. There were no bitumen roads. Roads were like little more than tracks, impassable if it rained. We had 3 house cows that were put out each day into the long paddock. That was the roadway. They provided milk, cream, homemade butter and fertiliser for the garden, where we grew all our vegetables and fruit trees. We had our own chooks, and really it was truly a subsistence existence. The Great Depression of the 30s made conditions much worse. It put men out of work and it closed down the economy. My dad's work time was reduced to 3 days a week. And I can still recall seeing young men out of work, walking the railway tracks and roads from town to town to qualify for food rations authorised by the local police, sleeping rough with their swags on their backs. There was also, during the 30s, an overriding threat and worry in the expected and feared Japanese invasion, which almost happened in the early 40s. In the 40s, the domestic economic conditions stagnated as full effort was dedicated to the war requirements. Queensland particularly was a frontline state which really decimated whatever infrastructure we had, such as the railways, the roads and public amenities and such like. During this time, I left school after year 10 with good results, but with the Japanese virtually just out front, a job in the government had precedence over the conclusion of my secondary schooling. I had to wait many years before I was able to study for my commerce and economic degrees at the University of Queensland. I joined the Air Force at 18 years, serving overseas in Borneo, and then into Japan after their surrender for 18 months in the occupation forces. On my return, I married the prettiest girl in Holland Park. When we were both just 21, we had our family, and they've had 68 years of happy married life since then. The 50s were very little better than the 30s and 40s, as we went through 10 more years of austerity as the government's fearful of runaway inflation, which would have wrecked the economy completely, clamped down on spending. Really, for over 30 years, 10 of depression, 10 of war and the aftermath, and 10 of austerity, the whole community, the governments and the citizens, were imbued with a careful outlook. We must not spend, we must put it away for a rainy day. The 60s were our turning point, but we still endured what was in fact a third world existence. Our cities, including Brisbane, were not sewered. Our suburban streets were gravel and dust. Our roads were 2 lanes and gravel and would not get us to Townsville if it rained. The railways were prehistoric and steam driven. We had small cottage industries such as stove foundries, a shoe manufacturer, wool scours and abattoirs, but no head offices, no large-scale manufacturing, no service industries of note. In those days, you painted your own house, mowed your own lawn, grew your own vegetables in the backyard, and repaired your own motor car if you're able. We relied almost entirely on our primary industries. There was no coal industry, no aluminium, no tourism, and Brisbane stopped at Mount Gravatt and Chermside. The Queensland Treasury was broke to the extent that in 1 year we had to write away to the Commonwealth Government for a temporary loan to pay the wages. Furthermore, we had no way of getting out of this desperate pit. We couldn't benefit from rising tax revenue because the economy just was not producing taxation revenue, income. The Loan Council would not let us borrow our way out of this malaise. And this was just 50 years ago. I've dwelt on all of this misery and primitive existence for a reason. To experience these privations from early childhood, through depressions, wars and the aftermath, and living at the very impressionable age in utter desolation in war-torn Japan, and then enduring the man-made austerity back home, all of this provided me with the motivation to ensure that we emerged full steam from this morass when I was in a position to help make it happen. We first of all needed a team of young, dedicated, energetic and enthusiastic graduates who I recruited into Treasury, skirting around to the archaic public service protocol that was still relying on the rigidity of precedent and seniority. We then had to convince the government and the population generally that with no money in the bank and no domestic capital out there that we could borrow, horror of horrors, we should introduce overseas capital. We had to convince our people that overseas capital would produce thousands of times more for the economy than it would take back home as dividends. We also had to show overseas investors that our government was prepared to facilitate the establishment and development of major industries here in Queensland. Not fund them, we had no money, but we had the resources they needed, and we had the capacity and the willingness to clear the way for their development. For the coal industry, for example, we initially drilled the Bowen Basin and established the enormity of the reserve there. We then used the conditions we attached to the miners' mineral lease to secure the development to the best advantage of Queensland and Queenslanders. We required them, for example, to build townships out at the mines, pay good royalties for the minerals, build roads, etc. We also had to get the budget into balance. This was achieved by strict control of expenditure and then to seek out sources of revenue other than the taxation of the citizens. The solution flowed from a rapid diversification of the economy that broadened the tax base. We then modernised the mining royalties, which had been set for generations at the general rate of 5 cents a tonne, by adding the 3-letter word per between the 5 and the cents, making it 5% of the value of the mineral if the mineral was used to value add here in Queensland, and 10% if it was simply quarried and exported. Concurrent with these general measures, all of our major projects and the major economic development of Queensland, including the coal industry, the aluminium industry, the overseas tourism industry, proceeded at no cost to the Queensland taxpayer with no remaining debt. Once these were in place, we not only had a balanced budget, Queensland also had a AAA credit rating that made borrowings on the world markets easier and cheaper. The debt was only for projects that serviced their own debt obligations, such as ports and railways, toll roads, etc. And this debt was exceeded by our own cash assets. In other words, we had a negative net debt. Also, all of the state's ongoing obligations, such as for staff superannuation, were fully funded, a worldwide unique record which stands today. I mentioned earlier that we sometimes had to bend the rule to get to the objective. More often it was creating new rules, thinking outside the square to solve the problem. Actually, thinking outside the square permeates nearly all of my anecdotes. None of the solutions were repeats of one that had gone before. Each problem called for its own resolution. As an example, one of our first projects was the rehabilitation of the Mount Isa rail line. A fully functioning Mount Isa mines at that time was the only big business we had, and it was operating at the end of a clapped out rail line. We put together a well-prepared case for a special $300 million loan to the Loan Council, all within the square and within all the guidelines and precedents. The Loan Council said no. Then, thinking outside the square, we decided to submit our case to the World Bank. Now, the World Bank in Washington has a handful of contributing nations, including Australia, and hundreds of nations and regions who are supported by grants and loans, ranging up to fully repayable loans at interest. Now, we applied for the latter, and I believe it skated through all tests. Before the bank came back to us, they phoned Canberra to tell them the story and said, "Why can't you lend the money? It's in your country, the proposal is perfect." Canberra was suitably embarrassed, and we had the loan through them approved within weeks. We rehabilitated the line and repaid the loan with interest within 10 years. That's 10 out of 10 for thinking outside the square. Further examples are, for the coal industry, we were strongly of the view that the best result for Queensland, that we, the government, determined the way the industry developed and that we positioned and owned the infrastructure. For mining companies to own and provide the transport infrastructure, for example, could very well have meant a web of branch lines into the mines, fewer mines for those that could not afford the infrastructure, restricted port access and so forth. So the decision was taken that it was to be a government-owned rail and ports. The rail system would be new and offered 2 kilometre long trains, each powered by 6 diesel electric engines, with one crew up front, bottom dump wagons, with the trains being loaded and unloaded without stopping. The rail gauge would be 3'6", so we could use the rolling stock right throughout the state. The ports would be new and deep for up to 500,000 tonne ships, which would enable us to compete in price in all the world markets. To Europe, for example, shipping freight was $10 a tonne cheaper than for Panamax vessels. Panamax vessels are those that are able to go through the Panama Canal and are usually only about 60,000 tonnes. And to Japan, in a bigger ship, the coal was $3.50 a tonne cheaper. The miners were happy with the concept, but argued the funding proposal. They were told we needed some guarantee that once all this first-class infrastructure was provided, they would use it to capacity, because it was only them and kangaroos out there in the back blocks, and if their overseas customers didn't send the ships for any reason, we needed the security for our expected freight revenue. Once again, they were okay with the concept of a cash security deposit, but they didn't ask me how much is it, and when I told them it just happened to equal the cost of the railway line and the cost of the rolling stock, the discussions began in earnest. We built the line and the rolling stock, funded by the security deposits provided by the miners, which was returned to them over a period of 10 years at 8% interest. These repayments came from a discrete addition to their rail freight. For the aluminium industry, we had to get electricity to the company at world competitive prices before we could insist that they upgrade the bauxite here in Queensland. and we had to do that at no cost to the taxpayer or other electricity user. This was achieved by securing a special government loan allocation to build the Gladstone power station. This loan could be raised at much cheaper interest and repayment conditions than private borrowings. We then had to get the coal into the power station at the cheapest possible cost. As it happened, we were negotiating a new mineral lease for a coking coal mine at Blackwater. This coking coal had an overburden of lesser quality steaming coal, and we were able to negotiate the coking coal lease to provide the steaming coal to the state at nil cost, other than for washing and transportation. And the power price was then now competitive with the world markets, which are relying mostly on hydro power. There would not be an aluminium industry in Queensland now had this not been possible. To get the overseas tourist industry underway, we introduced casinos whose licences required them, amongst other things, to provide golf courses and guided tours and other tourist terminal facilities, which set the norm for all the other tourist hotels. The cultural centre in South Brisbane was built at no cost to the budget or residual debt. The Commonwealth Games, Expo 88, South Bank, the film industry on the Gold Coast, the Lucinda Long Wharf, sugar terminals, the gateway bridges, etc., are all examples of great public infrastructure provided at no cost to the taxpayer. Now, well, in conclusion, in all of this, I would emphasise that to you, as the future leaders of the nation, never be content with the status quo. There is always an improvement to be had. And remember that empires in all history, from the Persians to the British Empire, have waxed and then waned when they thought it would always be as good as it is today. The same can be said of every national economy today, including, of course, Queensland and Australia. Life, lifestyle, living conditions, your personal wealth and circumstance, like the economy, will not plateau. It will either go up or it will go down. And my exhortation to you is to keep that trend line pointing up. Be entrepreneurial, think positively, dream your own bright horizon and chase that dream. Work inside and outside the square, and don't be afraid to form yourself into a team to make it all happen, but select that team carefully. Thank you.